enterprises have spent or are spending a lot of money on their network security, not just on firewalls. Firewalls are about 80% of the network security market. So certainly a lot of money goes to the firewall, but they're also investing in intrusion prevention systems, in network antivirus, network anti-spyware, data leakage prevention, proxies, URL filtering devices, and so on and so forth. And if you look at all these devices, including the firewall, they're really looking at two applications, web and email. What I mean by that is that if you're going to get a virus into your organization over an application like SharePoint, or over a WebEx file transfer, or over an MSN Messenger file transfer, or pretty much anything beyond basic web browsing or email, your network antivirus will never find it. If someone is trying to hack any of these applications, your IPS will never find it. If one of your employees takes confidential information and uploads it to the internet via Dropbox, or uploads it to the internet via some rogue SharePoint implementation or whatever, your DLP will never find it. So we're spending a lot of money on really protecting two applications, web and email. Those are protected very well. We can control what users can do with web. We can control what kind of sites they go to, how much time they can spend on the web, and so on and so forth. We can secure web traffic. We can scan web traffic for viruses, for spyware, for data leakage, for other bad things. And the same applies to email. But nobody's doing it for all the rest of these applications. Now, that was okay 10 years ago when the only applications were web and email. The problem is that today there are many other applications. As Mike said, you need to be able to look into port 80, 225, 443, and so on and so forth. In my opinion, we should get rid of the concept of port when it comes to network security. Ports don't mean anything anymore on the internet, and we should be able to look at all the traffic all the time, regardless of which port and protocol it's using. So the first requirement is a next-generation firewall, or a firewall that can actually do something today, needs to be able to look at all traffic all the time and figure out which application it's looking at. It doesn't matter which port it is, but it is to figure out which application it's running on. The second thing that is relevant today are IP addresses. IP addresses don't mean anything anymore. Destination IP addresses don't mean anything because when you go to a website today, it can be anywhere. You can go to google.com and run a search, and it happens to be in China, the site that you went to. So a modern firewall, a next-generation firewall, needs to be able to identify users, regardless of what IP addresses they use, and of course, without asking them to authenticate to the firewall, because users don't like to authenticate to the firewall. They already authenticate themselves to the network in the morning. You need to be able to be part of that. And then the third thing is a firewall needs to be very, very granular, as we heard here, in understanding what the user is doing with the application. Okay? You need to understand, okay, Facebook has a lot of things in it. It has different applications. Users can just read their walls. They can chat. They can send messages. They can send email via Facebook. So you need to understand what the user is doing with the application.
They can upload files.
They can upload files. They can receive files. So you need to understand what the user is doing with the application. And this needs to be the basis of what the next generation firewall does. So identifying who is the user, which application they use, and what they're doing with the application is the basis of a next-generation firewall. And then you need to do what I said in the beginning. You need to take what you do today for web and email and do it across all applications, across all protocols. So you need to be able to do access control, which today you do with the firewall. Of course, today your access control is you either allow port 80 or you allow port 80, or you either allow port 43 or you allow port 443. This is your access control today. Here, the access control is going to be based on who the user is, which application they use, and what they're trying to do with the application. And then the second thing that you need to do is to take all the security stuff that you do today. They're looking for viruses and for spyware and using all these advanced methods that need to be developed and are being developed in order to look for things that are zero-day and things that we don't know about. And you need to apply it to all applications. You need to apply it to all traffic, not just for web and email. And, of course, you have to do all of that at the same speed that the traditional firewall is running at, and hopefully also cost as much as a traditional firewall so someone will actually buy it, and so that enterprises can afford it. A next-generation device, the security device, next-generation firewall, needs to be able, first and foremost, identify, as I explained, who the user is, what the application is, and what they're doing with the application. And that has to be at a very, very low level of the device, because everything else has to be based on the user and the application. Remember, everything used to be based on port and address. And that's why stateful inspection firewalls, when they receive the packet, the first thing they did is take the IP address, take the port number, and figure out what it is. And that has to be replaced with something that gets the packet, identifies the user, identifies the application, and what the user is trying to do with the application. So the first requirement is to do it at a very low level, and not as a bolt-on that sits on top of the firewall that later at some stage maybe will figure out what the application is. Okay, so it's essential that we replace stateful inspection. We replace the element that identifies IP addresses and ports with what we call App ID, which is an element that identifies the application, the function in the application, and User ID, which is an element that identifies who the user is. Okay, so the security device has to do those things at the very, very low level. The first thing that the security device needs to do is identify those things. And then everything else has to be based on that. The other architectural requirement is to be able to do all those things at very high speed, which implies that you cannot have a device that has an antivirus engine on it, and an anti-spyware engine on it, and an IPS engine on it, and a DLP engine on it, and an advanced malware detection engine on it, and a correlation engine on it, and this engine on it, and that engine on it. It has to be a device that has a malware detection and prevention engine on it. There has to be one engine that looks for all those bad things once, not scans everything seven times for different things. Scan it once and figure out once what it is, and then allow the user to act on it.
No. For a lot of the reasons that Nir just kind of laid out, right? Because what you just said is, I do 100 gig of firewall and 10 gig of IPS and, 400 meg of virus and, 10 meg of DLP. That is a UTM, right? It's all these functions within a common box, but, it's more what we used to call it metagroup, right? Integration at the glass rather than, kind of integration within the product. Now, again, that doesn't mean that it's not going to solve the specific customer's problem. So I'm not going to sit here and say, there's no value to, that kind of bundled approach, because there is, given a certain use case. But if you're trying to get that visibility and control at the application layer at high speeds, that kind of architecture is, it's challenging for me to see how that kind of architecture gets you to where you need to be.
Everyone would agree that whatever it is, it needs to do more, because we can't continue to have all of these pizza boxes.
And it needs to be different than the old stuff. If it's just the old stuff sitting in one box, it's still old.
If my use case is to check a box which says, I have a firewall, I have an IPS, I'm doing some level of content control, and I'm web filtering, then UTM solves a problem. And again, there is a large slice of the market that is their problem.
Yep.
We can sit here and debate and argue about whether that's right or whether that's wrong, right? Being security guys, it kind of makes my stomach turn, right? Oh, God, you settle for that? You're happy with that? Right? Why don't you just accept mediocrity, when you get up in the morning? But hey, a large portion of the world defaults to that. One, because they don't have the sophistication, they don't have the resources, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the money to really solve the problem.
I think that the main challenge is the mindset. It's not that easy to move from the mindset of port and protocol to the mindset of users and applications. Port and protocols are easy. You just open the port, right, because there's only one port to open, and then everything goes through it. When you start thinking about users and applications, some of the firewall administrators will need to change their mindset, and most of them are capable of doing it, of course. It's just that it is a process. And for that, you need very good advice, which usually you will get from the partner of the vendor that sells you the product, and you can get it through training. But there is a shift. However, I think that there is no way to avoid that shift. Right. The world cannot continue relying on IP addresses and ports, and if you don't make that shift, you will stay behind and someone will replace you.
It's always exciting when you see things that are different, right? Some folks just were very comfortable in their status quo environment, and hey, life's good. I've got my firewall, I've got my IDS, I renew those every year, and life is wonderful. But unfortunately, our adversaries are not constrained by that kind of approach. So these guys are always looking for new ways to do things, always looking for innovative ways to separate, your intellectual property and sensitive data from your systems, right? So, we can look at this as something that's scary, or we can look at this as an opportunity to really rethink how we do a lot of things from a security standpoint.